there was a button that no longer appeared here. Oh, so Melissa, if you can hear this, you are currently the host, so you are the only one who can start the recording. And once we start that, I will go ahead and start. Okay, meeting recording is in progress. Great. Okay, good morning, everyone. Um, it's not quite October yet, but it's a good time to start thinking about it, particularly the compliance check student data privacy is going to be doing on the 1st of October. So to start, basically I'd like to go through all of the different things that we're going, and some of the ones that are a little more concerning ones we've gotten questions on. So hopefully, okay. So first ones is the annual notice of FERPA rights. And this has been required under FERPA for some time, but it is the first year our section is going to be checking for it. So we have gotten some questions. And if you go to our webpage, there is a link to the Department of Ed's model document, and I'll go through that in just a second. But I wanted to say that the things that I will be looking at when checking to see if it meets all the requirements. So one of them is that it mentions the rights and procedures that are offered to parents under FERPA. So should say something about the ability to access student records, a process to amend inaccurate, misleading, or otherwise information that is otherwise violating the student's privacy, information on disclosures, and how to file a complaint. That's all required under FERPA. And FERPA also requires that there be a specification for determining who a school official is. This generally ends up just being a list of the groups that are school officials. So it'll certainly mention about teachers, administration, uh, could include contractors, particularly if you are sharing with educational websites or things like that. And a definition of legitimate educational interest. If you're using the template, this I think says something along the lines of, anyone who needs the information in order to fulfill their professional responsibilities. Um, so the other question with a lot of these is, where do you need to put it? Particularly because in Utah law, it specifies everything has to be on your website. Since our law doesn't say anything about where this notice is, it's just what FERPA says, and FERPA just says put it somewhere where parents are likely to see it. You don't have to send it directly to parents. It can just be on your school's website. I know a lot of schools have a parent's handbook that has all of the different policies. I've seen um, some schools place this notice there, or it could have been part of your back to school paperwork. For our purposes, if you go to the Qualtrics survey where we're collecting the information, you'll have the option of either submitting a web link or directly uploading a copy of your notice. So I'm going to stop the PowerPoint real quick, hopefully, to show you just what the model notice looks like. So this is the one, if you went to Department of Ed's website, so this is the link if you go on our website where it's got the table of all the different evidence, and you click on the link, it will open this document. You can see that there's some parts that are in brackets. Those are the parts you'll want to change. So instead of name of school, you'll want to put your LEA's name. Elsewhere, parent or eligible students who wish to ask the school. So look for those brackets. Otherwise, see exactly what I said. So that first right to amend, to access records, that's number 1. The amendment is number 2. Number 3 relates to disclosures, and then the second paragraph under 3 is the determination for school officials. And so you can see, just like I said, there's In kind of the middle, school official typically includes a person employed by the school, such as an administrator, supervisor, instructor, may include your contractor, of those kinds of things. Honestly, if I were using the template, I would just keep all of that. If there was something we felt like needed to be added or clarified, we might do so. And then here you can see that definition of legitimate educational interest. If the official needs to review a record in order to fulfill his or her professional responsibility. Now, in this document, there are a couple of ones that says optional. I would recommend that you keep these in. This first optional one relates to the student transfer exception in FERPA, which basically, if you're transferring records from one school where the student is going to attend, you have to notify parents that you will transfer those records on. And you can do that on a case-by-case basis, or FERPA also allows you to put it in this notice to basically say, look, if a student's going to transfer, we're going to go ahead and transfer those on. So this is a good one to keep in there simply because it means that you won't have to notify parents on a case-by-case basis after the fact. So I would just take out where it says optional in this note, which basically just says what I just said, that if you don't keep this in here, you will have to notify them on a case-by-case basis. Then here you can see regarding complaints. There's a note here that says you could merge this with your directory information notice. That's fine. And then the last part is this, which lists all of the different FERPA exceptions, which I think is a good thing to include, to not remove. That's basically what the rest of it is letting parents know, here's the other ways we will share records without your consent. And that's this whole document. So I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint then and move to the next notice, directory information notice, which is the other one required by FERPA if you're going to be sharing directory information without parental consent. So what we'll be looking at for this is, do you designate the types of information designated as directory information? The Department of Education has a template that does exactly this. And it also has to include the timeline for a parent to be able to opt out. And this is something I've seen in ones where LEAs have created their own that is often missing. It doesn't indicate how long a parent has to let you know. Honestly, it can be whatever you can handle. It should be reasonable. I mean, it shouldn't be, like next day or something like that. There's no hard and fast guidelines on how long you have to accept these. I know in certain charter schools, they say basically just throughout the year, if you change your mind and you want to opt out, just let us know. They're smaller. They can probably handle those kinds of requests. But I think part of the idea is if you don't have the bandwidth to be accepting opt-outs throughout the year, that you can set a time limit. You can say, you have till the end of the month, you have 2 weeks. And after that, we don't have to honor your request. However you want to do it, we're just going to be looking for a timeline. There needs to be something in there that says you have this much time to opt out. Optional content, which incidentally is not in the model document, is what's called limited directory information. This is where instead of just saying the types of information, you can also indicate the uses of the information that you will disclose without consent, or the parties you will disclose to. Now, why might you want to do this? Well, the reason would be, I would think, parents that are opting out a lot, some of it be concerns related to who you are going to be disclosing it to. They don't want you to have this kind of blanket, open, implicit consent that you will just disclose to whomever. So it becomes the kind of thing where if you indicate in your notice, yes, this is our directory information, school photos are only going to be disclosed for the yearbook, for graduation photos, that sort of thing. where if you indicate the uses that you're going to do, then a parent might say, you know what, I won't opt out then. And that's one less opt out you have to process or worry about. So if that's kind of the situation you're in where you have a lot of opt outs that seem because they're concerned about having open uses or open parties you can disclose to, a limited policy might assuage some of those concerns, and then they might not opt out and make it easier for you. This, similar to the annual FERPA notice, you don't have to directly notify parents, just put it someplace they're likely to see it. School website, parent handbook. I know this is one that also, for those districts using Aspire, there's some functionality built in there that when the parent registers, they're able to get the policy directly from the SIS. And all of those are fine. And let's switch over, look at what the model looks like. So this one, I like that at least the places where you'd want to change, you know, who you are, they nicely put in bold, so school or school district. So you should hopefully be able to find those fairly quickly. It provides an explanation of what it is. And down here in this paragraph is where you can see the part I was talking about where you have to specify the timeline. So you must notify the school or school district in writing, insert date. So we will want to be seeing that you have created a timeline for parents to opt out. Then here is the list of information that you may include as directory information. I would, again, recommend, unless you are really certain you're not going to ever disclose a student's date and place of birth, for example, I would recommend not taking too much away from this. Largely because you don't want to have your notice not reflect your reality, right? You don't want to tell parents one thing when in reality you're going to need to share that. Outside of cases where, like, you know, if you do not have athletic teams, so you know you won't be sharing the weight and height of members of athletic teams. Outside of those ones, I would again, unless there's like a really compelling reason, it's something you've worked on and have discussed at your school, I'd recommend keeping these as they are, just because you don't want to run into a situation where you actually want to share that, and FERPA would say you could, but since you told parents you're not going to, that you're going to be restricted. Otherwise, hopefully you can see this is a fairly easy template to modify. Just change out every time it says school or school district, and then insert the date wherein it's reasonable to collect that information. Back to the slideshow then, and one thing I do want to say that I have noticed, with the directory notice, we have looked at several LEA's websites and found different copies of directory information notices. Sometimes they contradict each other. And I think part of this comes from when we look at the annual FERPA notice template, that it said you can include your directory information notice here. And the LEA did that, but then they had another directory information notice, maybe an older one, that didn't list the exact same information or didn't list the date. So this is a little bit of a concern where if you have two directory information notices, how is a parent supposed to know which one is the right one? So we want you to, when you submit on the Qualtrics survey, give us the one that is the official one. I will be looking at your websites to see if I find anything else. And if I find a different directory information notice elsewhere on your website, I'll let you know so you can, you know, make sure that you have that single source of truth on your website. We don't want to have it be too confusing. Moving into the Utah law. So Utah law requires that LEAs post on their website what's called the data collection notice. This has been in the Student Data Protection Act pretty much the whole time it's been there. It was called something a little different at first, but very clearly called the data collection notice now. This is going to be our first year that we're checking for this on October 1. So it's good to know exactly what all is supposed to be in there. And this is one that is really pretty prescriptive in the law. So you need to list what are the necessary, optional, and prohibited student data that you collect. These are lists that are pretty well prescribed in law as well. In the Student Data Protection Act, there's a big long list of here's the data that are necessary, here are the ones that are optional, and a very short list of prohibited student data. The law requires that you include this exact statement in your notice. The collection, use, and sharing of student data has both benefits and risks. Parents and students should learn about these benefits and risks and make choices regarding student data accordingly. There needs to be a description of how you store and protect student data, a description of student rights. Now, where this one should be is also compared to the FERPA ones is very prescriptive. The law says it has to be a prominent standalone document. So whereas for the federal law, you could combine the notices together, this one has to be on its own. And it also says it has to be posted to your website. So for the evidence we're going to be looking for on October 1, I'm going to want the URL. You just copy, here's the URL. I need to see where it is on your website. Now we have created a notice that is really, there's not a whole lot for you to change here. Here is the list basically just as it appears in the law of what is considered necessary student data, followed by the list of what is considered optional student data, and then the prohibited student data. There's supposed to be a section on data sharing, how you will share data, and it refers to the FERPA notice, it refers to UTREX in this case. The benefits, risks, and parent choices. So we include the exact that I said has to be in there, followed by a repetition of the different rights that parents have. And this is one area where if you're including this full notice, then this is officially not required, but we thought it was really regarding parents' rights would be to have this little section here where you can say who to contact if you have a problem. So this is really the only place you'd need to come in and edit something is basically put your contact information in as the data manager. Or if you'd like to list a different contact at the local level who they should get in touch with. Otherwise, there is a link to the USBE hotline. That is the best way for them to get in touch with us if they want to escalate it to the state level. And this link will take you to the Department of Education's form in order to file a complaint with them. Lastly, there has to be the description of storage and security requirements. We kept that really simple, basically just saying you're following a cybersecurity framework, which is most likely the CIS controls. If you're not using the CIS controls, if you're using a different framework, say something like NIST, then you would want to change that to reflect what you're actually doing. But hopefully this is one where you would just make some very minor tweaks to allow parents to know what their rights are under Utah law. And that is not PowerPoint. That is PowerPoint. Okay. Moving on then to data governance plans. Now this is a little bit more bread and butter, something we've checked the past 2 years. This is something I'm pretty confident every single LEA has something that meets most of these requirements on the website. Now, Utah law specifies that your data governance plan has to include certain elements. And there were changes to board rule in 2018, so last year, after October. And these changes need to be reflected in your current plans. And so that's where the two big highlights are, is there was a change regarding that you need to have a policy on how you maintain and secure student data. This is a small change that hopefully you can reflect fairly easily in your plans. And also there needs to be changes to your policy on expungement. So I'll show you the model document we have for this in just a second, but also I want to say that Utah law specifies this has to be posted on the LEA's website. So again, I'll be looking for the URL. Just point me to where it is on your website so I can find it easily. So let's take a, well, actually, this slide first. So for those of you who have been using your data governance plan, here's a couple of things you might want to be aware of. You could change for here. One is that we are on our third version of the data governance template. Many are still using version 1, which was based on USBE's then data governance plan. We've edited data governance plan several times in the since then, so we're not even using a lot of that language that is in your plans. Some of those plans, if they were edited, they still include lots of very USBE specific language talking about positions that exist at USBE that likely don't exist at the LEA level. So if you're using this, it technically would meet the requirements of the law, but it's not accurate. You know, you don't have a coordinator for data and statistics. You don't notify all LEAs of changes to the UTREC spec, for example. So these are all things that you might want to consider removing from your plan because they're not things you're actually going to do. Otherwise, and I've already referred to this, the board rule changed to say you have to adopt a cybersecurity framework. That is really the policy that should meet that how you secure and maintain data part. Currently under board rule, that's most likely going to be meaning that you're going to adopt the CIS controls, though it could be another cybersecurity framework. NIST is the most likely one that comes to mind. Also, there was old language in the Student Data Protection Act regarding students being able to request to expunge their records after they have turned 20. Many of your plans still say this because it's what the law said at the time. We have removed this from the law. It's probably been out of there for a year and a half, largely because that doesn't reflect retention schedules, which, I mean, a lot of that information you should be deleting long before the student turns 23. It also ignores the fact that a student should be able to do it much sooner. Right? FERPA has that right to seek to amend records. Amendment could mean change. Amendment could mean expunge. It could mean delete. So a student shouldn't have to wait till they're 23 to be able to do those things. And so we had the language in the Student Data Protection Act change to reflect that. And then board rule talks about what the expungement process would look like, and it looks exactly like FERPA's right to seek to amend records. So let's go into that document. So this is, if you download the data governance plan template, what it looks like. Now, since many of you already have a plan, you don't necessarily have to completely scrape it and start using this. You're welcome to. This we tried to write in as simple of language as possible, even ordering all of the elements to be the exact order that requirements appear in the law. And so we also tried to make it where there weren't lots of places where you had to say replace names. Really, there's just one. And I also tried to make it clear by putting in yellow places where you'd want to make a change. So this is certainly one. Otherwise, the document just says the LEA. You could do a search and replace if you like, but we tried to make it where you would only have to make minimal changes to be able to use this document. So here is one of those first ones. Here is a policy related to adopt CIS controls as your data maintenance and protection policy. It's possible, depending on the version you're using, that you're missing some of these elements. So if you're going to just take from this template and kind of plug and play for the ones you need, there's one on, the roles and responsibilities of the data manager, the information security officer. There's a couple other ones that I think are worthwhile. So one is this training policy. And so we put here in yellow that, you can specify what, more specifically, the kinds of things you're going to train on. This would be really helpful. One, for teachers to understand if you're going to train teachers on one thing, front desk on one thing, principals and administrators on different things. If you spell that out in the policy, it's easier for you to know, exactly here's the plan. It also helps us to understand when we are checking your documentation, how you're handling things. So I just put that there as a note of, hey, you might want to be really specific on how you're going to train all your employees. There's a similar one that shows up here in your sharing policy. And these are really helpful, not just to have your plan, but also to train teachers on, right? So under what conditions are teachers authorized to share student information? Are they allowed to just sign students up for websites, or do they have to ask for approval from someone else? And I've seen some LEAs already start using this template, and it's very nice because it clearly says if a teacher wants to sign students up for a website, it has to first go to the curriculum committee, and then it has to be approved by the principal. Things like those detailed procedures that you could include in a training to teachers and say, look, if you want to use a website, here's the process. Also throw out a little shout out to Jess and her project with the Utah Student Privacy Alliance. We did see one LEA that modified this part to basically say, and then, it will, the LEA will check and see if it's already been put in the Student Privacy Alliance's website. And then if it is, they'll exhibit E it, and if not, then they'll originate. Those are some very nice details to include in your policy, again, that help reflect reality if that's what you're going to do. I think there's also a good opportunity to discuss the ways that a teacher is going to be able to tell who's opted out of directory information. So lots of details you could include here, and that's what this yellow section is basically saying. You don't necessarily have to. You can just keep it simple and say the data manager is going to approve everything, but these details can really help make it clear what your processes are. And then there is supposed to also be something about external research if you have, if you're using the studies exception. And you have to have some kind of process. And again, if you're receiving lots of these requests, or if you have a group that reviews these, you might want to explain that process here in more detail. If this isn't something that comes up very often, I think it suffices to just say the data manager will make sure that it follows FERPA and then move on. Here is that expungement policy I talked about, and these steps basically reflect board rule says, so you could just copy those directly and get rid of the language about a kid turning 23. Here is a very simple data breach response policy with procedures. The only part you'd want to check is what you call the person at the top of your food chain. If you're a district, it's likely a superintendent. If you're a charter, director, or something else, change that to whatever language you feel works best. And then is the model document. And then lastly, and these last ones are a little bit simpler. The only other items we'd be checking is the contact information for first the data manager, which is hopefully you. And that's actually the first thing you'll submit. It's just the name and contact. You're allowed to have more than one individual listed as a data manager. Would like to have their contact information. You're supposed to designate an information security officer, or ISO. This is a new thing that we're checking for the first time, so we just want that individual's name, contact info. They're going to be the ones that are going to see the implementation, CIS controls, or whatever cybersecurity framework you'll be using. And the survey right now does ask for the URL link to the metadata dictionary that is supposed to be on your web page. As many of you are aware, this tool has not been functioning for the past year and a half or so. We were hoping to have it up again. It's really close. Just very minor things that need to get done. We're anticipating it will go live again sometime after we do the October 1 check. And so since it would hardly be fair to have you do that, submit that as evidence when the thing isn't even working, don't worry about it for this October. That's why we have the big strike through. And with that said, that is everything I wanted to talk about. I'm gonna check the chat real quick. I just see Megan saying she can hear me. Are there any questions? Oh, I'm apparently the host now. Are there any questions I can answer? You can put them in the chat. I think you maybe can even unmute yourself and we can just talk. But I want to give you the chance to ask any questions and we can try and clarify anything. I'm going to take the silence as consent that you're ready to end this. So in that case, thank you very much for attending. We have been recording this. We will make it available. I'm not sure exactly where, but we will make it available if you need to review it. And also, I just want to throw out there that if you have any questions, please just out to me. I'm very open to helping you in any way to get these documents into the state they need to be in to be compliant with the law. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you for your attendance and have a great rest of your day.